Have you ever really stopped to think about why civilization started where it did? I mean, not just where, but why there and not somewhere else? The answer is this amazing story, a mix of geography, pure luck, and some surprisingly specific ingredients you need to build the world's first cities. And this is where we hit a massive paradox right at the start. Our species, Homo sapiens, we came from the heart of Africa. That was our cradle. So why didn't the first great civilizations pop up there? Why did they spring up thousands of miles away? Let's dig into this mystery. Okay, so first things first, we've got to get our heads around the two key places in this story. The place where humans got our start, and the place where cities got theirs. On one side, you have what we call the cradle of humanity. Think of places like East Africa's Great Rift Valley. For tens of thousands of years, this is where we figured out how to be, well, human. We're talking about developing complex tools, language, how to live together in groups. This was our starting line.
And yet, the first cities, those huge, organized societies we think of as civilization, they didn't show up there at all. They emerged way, way up north, along the rivers in Egypt and Mesopotamia. So right away, we've got this huge geographical gap we need to explain.
All right, so the first big clue to solving this puzzle really comes down to the land itself. Turns out if you're going to build something permanent, like a city, you need a stable foundation. And I mean that literally.
Just look at the contrast here. In the river valleys, you had these super predictable floods every single year, like clockwork. And they drop off all this new, rich soil, which meant a rock-solid, stable food source. But in Africa's interior, you were dealing with unpredictable rainfall and soil that was way harder to farm consistently. Your resources were always on the move.
And this one difference led to two totally different ways of life. In the river valleys, that stability meant you could grow extra food, a surplus. And when you have more food than you need for today, well, you can finally stop moving and build permanent homes. In the interior, the smartest strategy was to stay mobile, to follow the food and water as the seasons change. So here's the crucial point. You just can't build a city without a whole bunch of people living in one spot year-round. That population density is the magic ingredient. It's the only way you can start to develop all the complex systems, like government, laws, administration, that really define a civilization. But a stable environment isn't the whole story. You also need the right raw materials to work with. And this brings us to our next piece of the puzzle, what we might call the agricultural toolkit a region was born with.
So what exactly does it take to build an agricultural system that can change the world? Well, it turns out it's not just about having some plants and animals around. It's about having the right kinds of plants and animals.
And man, this scorecard really says it all. Eurasia just hit the jackpot. It had these high-yield, easily storable grains like wheat and barley, and it had big, useful animals like cattle for labor and sheep and goats for food. The interior of Africa, on the other hand, simply had fewer native species that were good candidates for this kind of mass domestication. It was really just a matter of geographic luck.
And that toolkit, well, it was the engine of civilization. It's what gave you the food to feed people who weren't farmers, soldiers, priests, rulers. It gave you the muscle to build monuments and transport goods. It supported the entire complex machinery of a state.
Okay, for our last piece, let's zoom way, way out and look at the biggest picture of all, the actual shape of the continents. Because this is where geography really starts to look a lot like destiny.
Think about Eurasia. It's basically a wide-open highway that runs east-west. Because the climate is pretty similar along the same lines of latitude, crops, animals, and new technologies could spread like wildfire across thousands of miles, from the Middle East all the way to Europe and China.
But Africa is oriented north to south. So if you're trying to travel down the continent, you're constantly crossing these dramatic climate barriers. You go from a Mediterranean climate into the massive Sahara Desert, then into tropical rainforests. Each of these zones was like a giant roadblock, slowing down the spread of farming and ideas.
So, let's put all of these pieces together. What is the actual final recipe for building one of the world's first great civilizations?
Here it is, the 4 key ingredients. First, you need environmental stability for predictable farming. Second, that stability has to create a food surplus so people can settle down. Third, you need the full agricultural toolkit, the best plants and animals for the job. And finally, you need that geographic connectivity so innovations can spread easily.
And when you look at it this way, you realize that places like the Nile Valley and Mesopotamia weren't just lucky. They were these incredibly rare ecological sweet spots. They were some of the only places on Earth where all four of these essential ingredients happened to come together at the same time.
And this is so important to understand. This was never a question of who was smarter or more capable. The mobile societies in Africa's interior were an incredibly successful and resilient way of life. They thrived for hundreds of thousands of years by being flexible and brilliant at adapting to a very challenging environment.
So the next time you think about the dawn of civilization, remember this idea. The question was never about where humans were the smartest. It was about where the environment itself created the perfect conditions and really the pressure that forced people to build cities,